into my 2025 to 26 winter weather outlook. Your host, Alvin Kamau. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the weather pattern we're expecting this winter and what that might mean for our temperatures. Then I'll take a look at drought and whether that will impact our winter or not, before I end with my own personal month-by-month breakdown of what I can expect. But if you're not a fan of winter, things can still change a bit. Let's get started by talking about that weather pattern. And if you guessed it, hopefully you said weak La Nina. If you did, ding, 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 because you got it correct. Now, instead of me just showing you what this weak La Nina does to our forecast, let's talk more about what a weak La Nina is. We have to look at the Pacific, where you have trade winds, stronger trade winds, in other words, that pushes those waters from east to west. And as a result of that, you have cooler waters over the Pacific, and generally, whether it's a weak La Nina or strong La Nina will determine our confidence in what you see on this map, which is wetter than normal conditions over the Pacific Northwest, and that colder air, the polar vortex that just waits to unleash itself over the U.S., but it's all about time between the colder air and the wetter pattern that's also favored over the Midwest and parts of the Ohio Valley to determine whether you get snow, rain, or even mixed precip. Now, over the South, that is where we're favoring a drier than normal pattern. Now, as we look also at temperature patterns, because it's not just La Nina that makes me tell you, hey, we're going to get a snowy winter, or hey, we're going to get nothing this winter. It's also temperature patterns and what I like to call NAO. This graphic comes from our friends out in NOAA, so thanks for them for making this graphic, because as you can see, we have what's called a negative phase and a positive phase. So a negative phase is technically what's associated with a La Nina. It's where that colder air is able to unleash itself over parts of the central U.S., and as you can see, that would impact many locations. And then a neutral phase, and even El Nino, this is where you would get warmer temperatures in a positive phase. And you notice that colder air is further up to the north instead of impacting our region. That is very important because as I show you this other graphic from our friends at NOAA, it kind of explains everything so perfectly. So a positive Arctic oscillation results in warmer air over the central U.S., and again, that colder air is further up to the north. Where a negative Arctic oscillation brings that colder air into the U.S., like stratospheric warming, a disruption to this polar vortex. It explains what a negative phase is all about. Instead of me just telling you it's when colder air pushes down south, the polar vortex gets mad. As long as you have moisture that comes in at the right time, that results in more snow, more rain, more ice. Again, it depends on your temperatures. And we'll see this fluctuate throughout the winter, especially as there are signs we might even enter into that neutral phase. Doesn't mean that all the cold air pushes itself up to the north, but it'll vary and it'll be in the middle. And that's where the challenging part of the forecast comes in. So we look at our friends at the Climate Prediction Center, and over the next few months, December through February of 2026, you notice how this weak La Nina takes its phase over the U.S., where we watch for that colder air over the north to see whether it pushes its way here. And of course, that jet stream that favors wetter than normal conditions over parts of the Midwest, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, etc., and drier conditions specifically over the southern part of the U.S., that whether it's a neutral phase or a weak La Nina will determine whether or not these areas would get any precip, because technically it's favored to be more warmer than average. So when it comes to precip, you notice this is going to be a favored zone, especially for areas southeast of St. Louis into the Ohio Valley. This is where we're pretty confident based on the latest trends and also analogs from previous years, because a weak La Nina has happened before, to figure out where we could see snow, rain, or ice. When it comes to our drought, because I know we're expecting a weak La Nina, we also see wetter than normal conditions favored, especially over the Midwest and Ohio Valley. That also means that drought conditions can improve over parts of Missouri and Illinois. So if you look at this color code from our friends at NOAA, you notice the color that we're in represents that improving droughts. It might remain in some areas, but we expect it to improve, especially as that weak La Nina continues to kick in. And considering that we've already got a lot of snow to start off the winter, that also takes care of the drought in some cases. Now, with the weak La Nina, that is drier conditions over parts of the southern U.S., So that means that drought development is likely, or drought conditions are going to begin if they haven't already over these locations. Now that all of that is taken care of, do we actually want to now know what we're expecting over the next few months? Let's start my month-by-month breakdown, starting with December 2025, which of course is current. As we know, it is feeling much colder outside, and I'm expecting that trend to continue. Now, we've already gotten above normal snowfall for this time of the year, and when I made this graphic, I'll tell you, that's before we got that big snow, before December started. And I've made some adjustments because of what we did see, because we've already gotten above normal snowfall, especially for the month of December, because at the beginning of the month, we're technically supposed to only get an inch, but the beginning of the month already added those totals up to 10 inches for the season. So I do expect that trend with colder air and maybe even snowfall to continue. We'll keep an eye on that. And of course, that means what's less likely? Those warm-ups. And if we do see any warm-ups, they're very short-lived because it's all about the cold. That specifically also means that above average precip, as we've seen from our Climate Prediction Center, is favored, especially to our southeast and parts of the Ohio Valley. That is where more snow, ice, or even just plain old rain could be expected. This means below normal temperatures and yes, above normal snowfall. But now let's get down to that 2025 white Christmas probability, and I have it right now at 30%. Now, to tell you that we'll get a white Christmas, it might sound a little bit crazy to you because yes, it is far out. But I don't see why 2025 couldn't end with a white Christmas. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. But this pattern favors it. If it happens, that's still to be determined. And if it does, definitely follow me on my social media platforms. Now let's flip over and cross over to the next year, 2026. And this is where the predictions come in. So my prediction for January 2026, and Happy New Year early, is that the colder pattern should persist. Any thaw should be brief and far between. And really, if they do occur, it's only going to occur with a very few temperature fluctuations. Now, when moisture comes into play, a mixed bag of precipitation can be expected. That would be snow, sleet, and even freezing rain, which is a slightly higher potential this winter. But remember, if you have colder temperatures and if they're below 32 degrees, we're talking about more snow. So let's not get so focused on the concern about mixed precip, because if you're further up to the north, chances are you're going to get more snow. And then also, just like we saw this past January in 2025, areas down to the south that were slightly warmer, but also below freezing, got that freezing rain. And if you love snow, focus on these emojis over the next few slides because this is all about you. Now let's get into the last month of meteorological winter, and that is February 2026. And my prediction for February 2026 is reinforcing batches of cold air. They're more brief. They're not going to be as dramatic as January might be, especially in certain portions of the month. But we have to watch for another final push of winter, especially as we get into February. That could briefly increase our chances for snow, but notice this. However, I said that a transition to neutral mode might push those chances a little bit further southward. Now, I do expect temperature fluctuations to be a little bit more frequent, especially late in the month, but let's watch those early to mid portions of the month. And if you go back to my previous videos, you remember in February 2025, we had a huge map of below normal temperatures, and that was a weak La Nina transitioning into that neutral phase. So as we get into February, I would watch for a pretty similar thing of some reinforcing colder air, but do expect more temperature fluctuations. So if this prediction turns out to be true, look at that groundhog, maybe 6 more weeks of winter. We'll see by that. Now I'm going to step out of the way so that you can read about this winter. And for 2025 to 2026, I'm expecting above normal snowfall. And yes, it is trending colder than average at times. Now, this winter, snow opportunities have started earlier, as we've seen in December 2025, influenced by a weak La Nina. And I expect that trend to continue, especially as we head towards January 2026, with fluctuations in temperatures most seen in February of 2026. So that is something to note. Now, also an additional fact about February, that it's the most uncertain. And I know you're like, Alvin, of course it's the most uncertain because we're looking pretty far out into the future. But it's because we're talking about the transition to enso-neutral. And an enso-neutral pattern would lead to a more disrupted pattern for our region, while also favoring a wetter pattern over the southern tier of the US. So let's finalize by talking to you about where you can follow me. You can download Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, to follow me for the latest weather reports. I'm also over on Threads and Instagram. Threads will be Weather with Alvin. Same thing with Instagram. But don't let this be the last time you're watching. Share this video with friends and family, as well as making sure you're liked and subscribed with notifications on, because we're just getting started with content, and I'm almost done with high school too, so that means even better stuff in the future. But until then, I'm wishing you and your family a happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. Thank you for everyone watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.